Good morning. I'm going to start with a little demonstration. And for this demonstration, you will need to use a sanctified imagination. Surely you're not all so growing up that you don't have any imagination anymore. The chairs that the children have put out are the high stone walls of a sheep pen back in the first century during the time of Christ. And we might even suppose that the sheep, and could the sheep come in, please? Hello, sheep? They're out there somewhere. We might even suppose that these sheep were part of the special temple flock of perfect sheep, flawless sheep, that were held in the neighborhood of Bethlehem to be the sacrifices at the time of Passover. Now think about that. That's where the sheep for the Passover were born. It was fitting that Christ be born there. So the children have to use their imaginations and suppose that they are perfect sheep without spot or blemish. Now, notice that there's a gap in the wall over there, right? And the gap in the wall to the sheep pen is called a doorway. Yes, exactly, a doorway. At night, the shepherd would put all the sheep into the pen for safety by herding them through the doorway. Well, that's already been done. So now, shepherd has to do his duty because the only way to prevent predators like wolves from getting into the sheep pen is that the doorway needs a door. The shepherd is the door. So, shepherd, lie down in the doorway. Now, when we practiced this at camp about a month ago, so I did have the idea before Andrew mentioned it last week. David raised a number of objections to this scene because he was concerned that the wolf might be able to climb over the wall. But I said, no, it's a high stone wall and the stones are cemented together. The sheep are safe. The wolf can't get in there. And he can't get past the shepherd because the shepherd prevents him. And the shepherd has his crook. So the shepherd protects the sheep with himself. What have we got here? This is a word picture. And that's what the sermon is about this morning, is word pictures. Jesus said to them in John 10:7, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture." Now, this is a double picture because he's the door to get in and he's the doorway to get in and the door to stop wolves from getting in, right? Both at the same time. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for sheep, literally lays down his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. This is an example of a biblical word picture. The sheepfold is the church. The sheep are his people. He knows who his people are, and he leads them into the sheepfold, and then, since there's only one door to get in, he becomes the door to prevent any predators from getting in. That door is firmly shut against Satan, here represented by the wolf, if you like. Once in Christ's sheep pen, no enemy can touch his sheep. We are safe. Now, the people listening to him say this would have known exactly what he meant. They knew about keeping sheep. Many of them would have grown up in the countryside. And as children and young adults would have taken their turns doing this, being the shepherd to lie down in the doorway to prevent the wolves from getting in. Well, they got it all right. They knew exactly what Jesus was saying. Now, so do we. So I had next year, you can take the chairs back, but that's already done. Anyway, our imaginations have had a good exercise. Now, some of you, like me, have been, or still are, teachers. I was asked this morning if I was a retired pastor. I said, well, I'm not retired and I'm not a pastor. Yeah, still going strong. And how many times have I stood in front of a class or a church or a meeting to talk to people? Over 54 years. I worked that out this morning and it came to approximately 20,000. And yet, a month ago, I gave a talk to the Canadian Council of Deans of Science, hotshot people from the top universities all across Canada. That was easy. When you stand in the pulpit with God's word in your hand, you have fire in your hands. And I'm giving you some of that fire today. But if you've ever been a teacher, you know that some people learn better by words, maybe written in a textbook, or they maybe just are told. Teacher puts some things on the blackboard. Oh, but most people don't have blackboards anymore, they have whiteboards. Others learn better by being shown how it works, by actions, by pictures. So here's an example from your long-forgotten grade 8 mathematics. In any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs equals the square of the length of the hypotenuse. You remember that? But there's a picture of this, which is a little bit easier to understand. Some people learn it one way. Some people learn it the other way. Well, God wants to make his message absolutely crystal clear to us, and he uses word pictures. Words that provoke your imagination to make a picture in your mind of what is being talked about. And that way the scriptures have it both ways. For example, God is our Father, the Creator and Lord of all things. Jesus as his Son. We as his sheep, his children. He is the door, the doorway, the ladder into heaven, the narrow pathway to get there, the light, the one through whom the Godhead created and interacts with the physical world. The Holy Spirit, literally the breath, the holy breath, is the person of God through whom he communicates to our spirits. The church as his people, his richly adorned bride, a safe and secure sheep pen. His written world as precious jewels, as gold, as honey to the heart. The entire Levitical system of the temple and the priesthood and the sacrifices is a picture of Christ who was to come, the great high priest and the true and only sacrifice for sin so that we could be saved. And consider how Jesus taught in parables, which are all word pictures of important truths, as even were his miracles, carefully chosen in particular in the book of John to emphasize the deity of Christ. E.W. Bullinger in the late 1800s wrote a book called Figures of Speech Used in the Bible. And he identified 217 different kinds of figures of speech. You may have, in a high school English course, learned about metaphors and similes. 217 different kinds of figures of speech used in nearly 8,000 verses in the Bible. I think the word picture should be thought of as a 218th. The poetry of the Psalms, the wisdom of the Proverbs, and even the historical books are all there to teach us much deeper truths than just the words. That's not to downplay the historical books like Genesis, for example. The history that they present should be regarded as accurate, but that history teaches us important lessons that need to be taken to heart. The sheep pen is a good introduction to word pictures, but today our task is to decipher a word picture of redemption that takes up an entire book of the Bible, and it's a history book, but it is so much more. But first, what do the noun redemption and the verb to redeem, to use the infinitive, mean? I'm not an English teacher, I'm a computing science teacher, but we use languages in computing science, right? And we have a vocabulary that means the same thing as linguists. When we speak of a type 3 grammar, we mean exactly the same thing as they mean over in the linguistics department. Redeem, redemption. Well, do you know what a pawn shop is? When you're desperate for money, you take something valuable like a watch or a ring or a necklace to a pawn shop and you get a loan. And your item of value is held in security until you pay the loan back with interest. if the agreed time expires and you don't pay to redeem your item, it belongs permanently to the pawnbroker. Oftentimes, items are pawned that are stolen, and the person pawning it has no intentions of ever coming back to redeem it. After my wife's untimely departure from this world, I went away for a few days, and when I came back, my house had been broken into, and all of her jewelry and keepsakes from her childhood for the whole 70 years plus of her life had been stolen. And I sent pictures to every pawn shop in the Lower Mainland. But later I heard that a truck with Edmonton license plates had been seen in the neighborhood, and there had been other break-ins. So it didn't do me much good. But those items were probably in a pawn shop somewhere. What is the biblical picture then when this word redeem is used? Because there've been pawn shops from ages past. Well, our souls belong to God. But when we sin, we pawn our soul. Stolen goods. Souls belong to God. He made them. He made us. We pawn them at Satan's pawn shop for a bit of temporary enjoyment. The trouble is that souls are of infinite value. We can't redeem them. We don't have anything of infinite value, and we can't make anything of infinite value to redeem the stolen souls. Christ paid the infinite value at the cross. And if you know something about mathematics, an infinite value can be drawn on an infinite number of times and still have an infinite amount left. So there is no limit to the number of people to whom his redemption can apply. No limit. Apply to Christ for the forgiveness of sins, be born again, and your soul is redeemed by him because he died for you on the cross. And your soul can never return to Satan's pawn shop again. Satan has no rights over it. Or to return to the last picture, the wolf can't get into the sheep pen because the door is closed by the shepherd. Now, what Bible what Bible book uses the words redeemer 9 times, redeems 7 times, redemption once, more times per page than any other book in the Bible? 18 times in 4 short chapters, when the 4 words combined only appear 109 times in the entire Bible. That's 4 times per page as opposed to 0.085 times per page in the Bible as a whole. 16% of all the uses, I'm a mathematician, right? 16% of all the uses of cognates of the word redeem are found in this one short book. Oh, the idea is all scattered throughout the entire Bible. But this is an entire historical word picture book on redemption. The main theme of the Bible is the entire theme of this one book. It is the book of the noble farmer and his virtuous wife, who had one of the most famous grandsons in the Bible, the book of Ruth. Their grandson was King David. I have a young grandson named David, who was the shepherd over here. Maybe he'll be famous too. A big David is already famous. This little book records for us a critical nation-defining event in Israel's history. And while certainly accurately recorded history, I think it is, in fact, a 4-act play meant to be performed, and probably was performed to music during David's time, which is very likely when this play was written down, because of the style of the Hebrew that is used, and because of the mention of David, it was likely actually put in written form during his reign. It's a critical book, a word picture of redemption, an illustration of how important it can be to make the right decisions in life and to make them for the right reasons, especially for leaders whose decisions not only affect their people in the moment and give them examples to follow, but they reverberate down through subsequent generations, as did the decisions made in this book. So let's set the stage, the social, political, and religious context. Ruth 1:1, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. in the days when the judges ruled. Well, the events in this book took place sometime after Joshua had died, when the nation of Israel alternated between following the leaders that God raised up, called judges, on the one hand, and going after the false gods of the surrounding Canaanite nations on the other hand. Time after time, people rebelled against God and adopted pagan practices, and God punished them. And they responded, and he raised up a judge, and the nation prospered as long as that judge lived. And then, when the judge died, they reverted back to worshiping the false gods. Judges 17, verse 6 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Now, in Deuteronomy, God, through Moses, had warned the people that if they did not follow his ways but turned to false gods, he would destroy their land so it would grow no food and bring a famine. And if they continued in disobedience, he would bring enemy nations against them, even to the point of taking them all captive and deporting them from the land. After all, he'd judged the previous people who had lived in that land in exactly the same way for their despicable practices by doing the same thing to them and giving the land to Israel. There was a famine in the land. Well. Our initial context is a time of famine. Apparently, the people had been disobedient, so God had punished them. This was a critical time. If Israel's leaders did not now turn themselves to righteousness and lead God's people in his ways, the next punishment that followed could be an invasion by enemies. What was the most powerful neighboring nation? Moab. There were many wars between Israel and Moab. The god of the Moabites in the time of the judges, by the way, was Chemosh, about whom very little specific is known, but he was similar to Molech, and some scholars claim they were two names for the same god. Child sacrifices were made to both Chemosh and to Moab, something God repeatedly called an abomination, and it was one of the main reasons that he cites in taking the land away from the Canaanites, was the worship of gods that required human sacrifices, children sacrificed. Right, so that's the context. The stage is set. Now we meet the initial protagonists. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah, and they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. What exactly were the circumstances that caused him to move there? We don't know, but presumably he was looking for greater prosperity. Instead of prosperity, disaster. We're not specifically told that the family was being punished for leaving Israel, but in general terms, no good thing can come by making a partnership with the enemies of God and living among them and living like them. So here is now a word picture of sinners come to the end of the rope. There's no hope. Abandoning God's ways and God's people to live like those of the world and even intermarry with them can never lead to prosperity, only to spiritual destitution. So what does Naomi do? Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, verse 6, to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. In the fields, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth were working as field hands in Moab. Dirt poor. Whatever they had when they got there was gone, and they were scrabbling out a living, essentially as almost beggars. But things have changed back in Israel. God has relented and ended the famine, brought prosperity. We are left to assume that there may be righteous leaders in the land again. God has given Israel another chance to show that it can be faithful to him, if only her prominent leaders would model what is right, show the people what it means to live under God, and get them to celebrate what is right and good in God's light and sight. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the home of a husband," that is, a new husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." Two young women who are at least nominally part of a godly family are faced with a decision. Will they revert to the ways of Moab and its evil god Chemosh, in which they have been brought up and among whom they have lived all their lives? Or will they profess loyalty to the family of Israel and the true God? Orpah represents those whose loyalty to God and his Christ is nominal. That's the word picture. Faced with the harsh trial of continued poverty in an unknown land under a God to whom she has not given her love in heart, soul, mind, and strength, Orpah turns back and becomes the type of those to whom the book of Hebrews would later be written. People who were considering abandoning their faith under persecution and who are told, as my friend Craig Montgomery summarizes it in his current sequence of sermons from Cranbrook Fellowship Baptist Church, which I watch every Sunday night, Jesus is better, Christ is superior, no turning back. That's what the whole theme of the book of Hebrews is. You should read it. Think about it. What does Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, say? For that matter, what do you say? Is your allegiance to Christ strong enough that if you were to lose everything, become penniless, homeless, cast out of society, reduced to going back to your homeland and hoping, begging from your mother-in-law's family, from her former friends and neighbors that you don't even know, to spare enough from their newfound prosperity to give you just a bare, scrabbled-out living? What would you do? Abandon the faith to live like the world? Or throw yourselves on the mercies of God and his people? And could you expect those who claim to be the people of God to respond, well, given that you are definitely not one of them? She's a Moabitess. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge." This is one of the most emotional passages in the entire Bible. I can hardly read it without my voice breaking up. "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Is that not an historic answer? Is there a more profoundly heartfelt declaration of faith anywhere in the Bible? This is amazing from somebody who's grown up in a pagan society. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity on me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Naomi and Ruth are the picture or type of the sinner come to the end of the rope, spiritually bankrupt, and with no one to care for them. But they turn to God. Act 2, chapter 2. Boy meets girl. or rather, older man meets much younger woman. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. This was part of the law of Israel, that a beggar, somebody who was destitute, could follow along the harvesters and pick up any grain that they had dropped or left behind. And they were allowed to do this. You were not supposed to go over your field and make sure you had gotten every last grain of wheat. Some had to be left for the beggars. We're left to believe that they were employed when in Moab, but now she's begging. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Notice that he assumes that Boaz has heard this story. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came and has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. I'm going to skip some of the rest. If you've read the story, you know what happens next. Boaz has heard about her, and he honors and blesses her for her faithfulness to Naomi, telling her to stay close to his servants, ordering his people to care for her, even to toss a few full sheaves aside for her, so she has plenty to take home to Naomi. Now, a couple of points here. Twice it's mentioned Boaz is of the clan of Elimelech. This suggests that Elimelech was a prominent man. It seems to suggest that he was the head of the clan before he left for Moab. But Boaz apparently now is the local leader, a wealthy and worthy man with plenty of servants, and what must therefore be a large tract of land. Now, according to a Jewish midrash, or commentary, which was written no earlier than about 200 years after Christ, Ruth was 40 and Boaz 80 when they met. But this cannot make any sense. Ruth is twice here called young. Moreover, Naomi was only in Moab for 10 years in total, since women generally married at the age of 12 to 15, and allowing time for Elimelech to get established there and he and his sons to get jobs, make some money, meet and get to know the families of Orpah and Ruth ahead of time, and noting that there were no children from either match as yet, the young marriages could not have lasted longer than a handful of years, making Ruth perhaps as young as 18. Actually, I think she was probably 18, but surely more than 22 at the very most. As for Boaz, he is a well-established and respected elder who later, we'll see, was able to call the other elders together. So he was a prominent leader in the community and a man of considerable wisdom, means, and influence. My guess is he was probably in his mid-60s to have had the degree of honor and respect that he was given. So suppose a range of 60 to 70, and therefore an age difference between him and Ruth, somewhere between 38 and 52 years. Older man meets younger woman. Act 2 concludes with Naomi's astonishment at how much Ruth had gleaned and at the gift of food that Boaz gave her. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So she, Ruth, kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Wait a minute now. What is a redeemer in this social context? The Hebrew word is gal, which generally means next of kin. But in the law that God gave Moses, this person had the duty to redeem the land Elimelech had owned before becoming destitute, before leaving. Presumably by now it had fallen partly into the hands of a moneylender to repay debt, thus their poverty. And more than that, according to the law, the closest male relative in the clan to any man who died childless had the duty to redeem the land and marry the widow, Naomi, that is, and father her children that would be counted as Elimelech's children, as the land would be too once it was redeemed. That was his duty, a redeemer. And that way the land would remain in the clan and belong to the heir that was born that way. But since Naomi was apparently too old to bear children, the only way this could happen would be through Ruth, the widow of Elimelech's son. Act 3. Decision time. Love found. Ruth chapter 3, verse 1. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she obeys her mother-in-law to the letter, and at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" "Dark." And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." She's asking him to marry her and redeem the line of Elimelech and the land to keep them both in the clan. Naomi and Ruth challenged Boaz for a decision. A decision. Will he do the right thing according to the law and marry Ruth so the clan of Elimelech will have an heir? The clan would then, in the normal course of things, be still called the clan of Elimelech, or the clan of that son, not the clan of Boaz, who was apparently its most important man at the time, and quite likely one of the more prominent men in all of Israel. For we are pointedly not told that there was a judge at that time. He could decline on the technicality, as it turns out, that he's not quite the closest male relative, or he could honor his deceased clan head, the law of God, Naomi and Ruth, by doing the right thing. More hung on his decision than might meet the eye just from reading the text. For as its leaders go, so goes a nation. Think about that. Moreover, she was far younger. She was born a Moabite, something that her half-black ancestry could not hide. She was obviously a Moabite. You could take one look at her and know that. So he would have to get out of his way to get a closer redeemer to step aside. And what would the people of the community, especially his family, say? If he already had one or more wives, which was likely, what would they say and do? This is an awkward decision. He did not hesitate, even for a moment. "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." That's his reason. Everybody knows her reputation, that she is indeed loyal to the God of Israel. "And now it is true that I have a redeemer, am a redeemer, and yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." Notice how many times the word redeem is used in that one sentence. Worthy. He says she's worthy. Worthy in the eyes of the community, a worthy and caring daughter to Naomi, proven to be industrious and diligent. The Proverbs 31 kind of woman, although that had not yet been written. Of good moral character, a woman who stood out for her loyalty to her new family and to the God of Israel. Who could not love such a woman? The whole community knew of her and thought her worthy. I'm skipping over some spelling mistakes here. Boaz was all in. And when Ruth got home with the 6 measures of barley that Boaz had given her for Naomi, she knew it at once. Well, she must have suspected that Boaz loved Ruth and just needed a little nudge to take action. She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." Act 4. If you have ever watched more than one romance movie, you know they all have the same plot, which can be summarized in 6 words. Love found, love threatened, love triumphs. They're all like that, right? That's the plot. That's the plot of this one, too. Boaz needed a plan to draw out that closer relative, that closer redeemer, get him to acknowledge his duty, and then renounce it to him. That was what was necessary. And he knew the other man pretty well. He could be tempted to do the first and provoked to do the second. So here's the story, Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. This is not an accident. He knew he would be there. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said, "Sit down here." He can give orders to the other elders. This is an important man. So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, so that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, okay, so he's got him to acknowledge the necessity that he is the Redeemer. Then Boaz said, "The day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite." Make sure he puts that word in there. He reminds him. "The widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Why does this other guy refuse the duty? He says, "Lest I impair my own inheritance," which I take to mean he is a younger man who is yet to inherit. And it has been made clear to him, presumably by his father, that if he marries the Moabite woman or has anything to do with her, he will be cut off. Had he expressed an interest? Had he asked his father about this woman whom everybody knew and respected? We don't know. But it is clear that he has been specifically forbidden on pain of being disinherited. Maybe his father was racially prejudiced. After all, Ruth was widely known as an honorable woman, as a solid citizen of Israel, even though she was dirt poor. So the only barrier there could be was her original birth and background, which the darker skin of any half-black Moabite could never hide. The passage continues. Then Boaz said to all the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. And Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." How do the people respond? This is important. The leader has given them direction, what he's going to do. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because of her offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." Now notice by this time a large crowd had gathered around the conference of elders. The whole community was decidedly with Ruth and Boaz, enthusiastic about what was happening. The younger man's refusal was understandable. Boaz's decision to do much more than just his duty was applauded and celebrated. And the bride and groom were not merely congratulated, but given a rich, fulsome blessing by all present there. No prejudice, When the play was presented in subsequent years, my guess is the audience would have given a standing ovation in concert with the people of Old Bethlehem. Conclusion and consequences when the play is over. What a wedding banquet must have ensued. Hey, Boaz was rich. He could afford to lavishly adorn his bride and entertain all of Bethlehem with a great community celebration. A word picture of the marriage supper of the Lamb, where all the people of Christ will be present. Ruth 4:13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, they're still on board, you see. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He will be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became her nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Lessons to be learned. For the characters, a life-changing moment. Naomi, who had lost her husband, 2 sons, and 1 daughter-in-law, could now count Obed as hers and Elimelech's, extending the line of the clan. Obed, by the way, means serving, for he served to perpetuate the line. For the nation, this was a history-changing decision. There were only 2 people qualifying as a redeemer. The one could not, and if the other would not, what would become of an Israel whose leader, a prominent leader, refused to do what was right and follow the law? Would Moab have invaded and enslaved them for a few generations? Instead, Obed has the son Jesse, and his son was King David. For us, this is a perfect word picture of the salvation Christ worked for us. Gaal had another duty. If a relative was murdered, it was the Gaal that had the duty to track down the offender and execute him. Thus, Gaal is only sometimes translated redeemer, and at other times it is rendered the avenger of blood. That is, the executor of justice. Now, do you see this double word picture of Christ in the Gaal? On the cross, justice was executed upon himself as he bore our sin. He suffered God's vengeance for our sin and therefore redeemed us from bondage to that sin and the eternal punishment that it implies. And then he lavishes on us the rich blessing of eternal life in him, with him in heaven. Anyone who will do as Ruth did and put his or her trust in the one and only true God, the creator and sustainer of the entire universe and Lord of all, and accept the redemption Jesus worked on the cross, has all sin forgiven. They become part of the church, his bride, a member of the family of God, all of whom rejoice with a full right to inherit heaven itself. Oh, there you go. A 4-act play that is entirely a word picture of redemption, with Ruth playing the part of the sinner who trusts in God, Boaz playing the part of the redeemer, and the whole community of believers joining in the celebration when she and he are both rewarded. I write alternate history science fiction when I have the time, in which I explore what might or could have happened if certain key historical decisions had gone a different way. This decision, and any decision, is a kind of nexus point in history, after which everything changes, one way or the other. Given the stakes, the decision that Ruth makes and the decision that Boaz subsequently makes to let love and the law rule in their hearts was surely a nexus point in the history of Israel. What would have happened otherwise? Moab invades. The people are taken into captivity. There is no King David. Well, as Aslan once said, no one is ever told what would have happened. But if you are in the throes of decision, trying to determine whether to follow Christ or not, I assure you that the choice you make will not merely change your whole subsequent life, it will change your whole eternity. And that, church family, brings us to yet another word picture, like this one given us ahead of time to represent what would happen at the cross, but instead given to remind us what has already happened at the cross and in our lives. The scriptures tell us in 1 Corinthians 11:26, for as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. This is a word picture of Christ's death, of our redemption, and of our remembrance of that. Yet another word picture, the third one for this morning. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Let us do that. Communion servers, would you come forward, please? And let me remind you as they do that since this little ceremony is designed to remember what Christ has done for us, if you are born again in him, you should participate. If you have not accepted Christ as Savior as yet, just pass the bread and the cup by, and no one will judge you for refraining participation.